Thank you so much, Ben, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Green Connections Green Tea webinar series, and happy Earth Week. We love to say that every week is an Earth Week and every day is an Earth Day, but it's still great to celebrate this week with a very special event. I also would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that in Houghton, we are gathering on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Atawandaran, Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples. The sacred land surrounding the Great Lakes has been their home and still is for 15,000 years. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to share and care for the land and its gifts in accordance with the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, a historic peace agreement made among Indigenous nations that commits to take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. We honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walked before us, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. So my name is Anelia, and I'm the programs manager at Oakvillegreen. We have Ben, who is a stewardship and volunteer coordinator. And today we are really thrilled to have a very special guest speaker. So thanks for joining us once again, Pearl, welcome. And I'll let you introduce yourself because we are really looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you. I'm truly honored to be here today. It warms my heart and thrills me to know that we do have people in Ontario who are concerned about and wanting to preserve Mother Nature, who are concerned about our Earth. We hear so many stories that climate change is not real and those kinds of things. It really is wonderful to meet with this group and understand the work that you're doing. Currently, as a Métis, one of the things that we do and I like to do is called smudging. And so if you see some smoke, that is the smoke from my smudge. And currently I'm burning sage. And the sage is a cleansing medicine, one of our 4 medicinal things. And it brings us down to earth, but it also takes away negativity and stress. And so when we as Métis smudge, we generally take off anything that's not a part of us. I have no earrings, no jewelry. And we bring the smoke up to our head to clear our thoughts. And we bring the smoke to our eyes to clear our vision and help us to take away the negative things. We clear our ears so that we can only hear the good things. We clear our mouth so that we only speak good and take away negative things. We clear our heart. We bring the smoke to our heart so that we only feel love and good and take away negativity. And the smoke can be used, and I use it often to clear my house from negative things, or when I'm having a bad day, it helps to create positive feelings. So thank you for allowing me to smudge. I also would like to start with prayer. If you are opposed to prayer or prefer not to be part of the prayer, you're welcome to turn off your volume or whatever you wish. But I pray because Creator is who gave us everything we have. So Creator, we are keenly aware that you have given us so much, and that we as humanity have taken away much more than we ought to. You have given us trees to purify our air, plants to nourish our bodies, creatures to sustain us. You have given ability and knowledge to make our way on Mother Earth. In turn, we have done great harm to Mother Earth. Help us to be better stewards of your creation. Help us to protect our water, our wetlands, our forests, and our lands. Help us to remember how important Mother Earth is to our continued existence. Thank you, Creator, that we have the opportunity to make this better. Show us better ways to live, not only with Mother Earth, but also with each other. Teach us to live on this earth in peace and reject war. Give us love and not hate. Give us cooperation and not division. Give us calm and not chaos. Help us to share and not be greedy. Help us to build up the lives of others, not to leave people downtrodden. Above all, Creator, we ask that you show us how to be better people, better to ourselves, better to our fellow man, and better to Mother Earth. If we can do this, we can make our world more like it was meant to be. Marcy, Miigwech, Amen. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to start in a good way. I want to just talk a little bit. First of all, can I ask, and please feel free to unmute and speak freely. I'd like to know what you know about the Métis.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Nothing.
Nothing?
I'm
Go
Nancy.
ahead.
I know extremely little, but I have begun. I've done Circle for Reconciliation a couple of years ago, and I am pretty plugged into the Oakville opportunities through the Oakville Community Foundation to participate in certain learning circles or events. And so the last circle I was at was actually hostessed by a Métis woman. I don't remember her name. I'd have to look up my notes, but I'm on a learning journey, and I love it. So I'm appreciative of being here.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'd like to start with, I call it Métis 101. And it's just a bit of a history of the Métis. If you're not familiar with Métis and their practices and their history, then hopefully this will be informative and helpful. First of all, the Métis did not exist until the early 1600s. And the word Métis means mixed blood. Mm-hmm. And what happened in the 1600s, the early explorers came to Canada, and they came with the purpose of colonizing Canada. And when they got here, they had no idea what Canada was all about. And at that time, it was just an absolutely beautiful, wonderful place. And so but they didn't know how to survive in the wilderness. And so they were mostly men. And when they came across, they married the Métis women, the First Nation women. And that mixture of blood started the Métis. Now, there are Métis, and when there are Métis who are just mixed blood, and that's okay. But within the Metis Nation of Ontario, the Metis are rights bearing, and those rights come out of the way of life. What happened was that when these families, the European and Indian families came together, First Nation families came together, they created families. And after several generations, these families were whole communities. And they had a unique way of life, different from the First Nations and different from the European. And that was out of necessity, because they needed to find a way to live together and survive, but also to develop their own kinds of things that were consistent with the way they believed and they lived. And so the Métis communities started to develop, and they had their own unique character, not French, not English, and not all First Nations. We honor our European ancestors, and we honor our First Nation ancestors. And they are our brothers and sisters, and together we respect one another. Once the Métis community started, part of the purpose was that they needed to help the Europeans. The Europeans did not know the waterways, did not know how to fish and hunt in this environment. And so we had what we called the voyageurs. And the voyageurs came across the waters of Canada, coming down the St. Lawrence River, because that's the closest to the European countries. And as they came down, many of them stayed right where they were. They just made communities and lived where they were. But the rights-bearing Métis are the ones who came through the Great Lakes, who led the colonists to the hunting grounds, taught them how to fish within our country, taught them how to survive and live. And they continued this journey across the country, and in fact went back and forth and led the Europeans to the kind of wealth that they wanted. Unfortunately, we don't value wealth. When the Europeans came over, they did not understand our way of life, the First Nation way of life. In Canada, there was no land ownership. We don't own Mother Earth. Nobody owns Mother Earth. And as we live and die, and our bones go back into Mother Earth, and our body goes back into Mother Earth, we realize we don't own anything. We really don't. And so we need to remember that. But the Europeans had another way of life. They built castles and they owned things. And so it was difficult for them. But we do not own things. We do not harm people or things. So when the Métis started to flourish as a community and as a culture, unfortunately, the Europeans did not want the Métis because they weren't all European. And the First Nations did not want the Métis because they weren't First Nation. And so we remained a people, unique but unwanted. And when Canada was more greatly settled, and when the nation was being formed, the Métis were not a part of a lot of the negotiations. You know that, first of all, as I said earlier, nobody owned the land. And yet suddenly the Europeans, settlers said, this piece of land is yours and this piece of land is yours. And in truth, none of it's ours. When you've probably, I'm sure, heard the history of Louis Riel. And Louis Riel was a Métis, and he was an outcast, and he fought for the Métis to have rights in their own country. And the Canadian government, as it was forming, did not want that. I think you're aware that Louis Riel was hanged as a traitor. Perhaps you're not aware that his signature is on the Canadian Constitution back in 1867. He was a part of the founding nation. It was Louis Riel who brought Manitoba into the Federation, into the Confederation of Canada. After Louis Riel was murdered, the Métis were persecuted. In fact, to the point where they would be killed. They would not be given property. They would not be given a place to live. They were outcast. And what happened was that they went underground. It was unsafe to be Métis. And so when I say they went underground, they stopped acknowledging their Métis heritage. They hid so that people would not harm them, so the men could get jobs, so the families could have a place to live. And Louis Riel once said, "My people will hide for 100 years, and then it will be their artists that bring them back." And that's what's happened as we look at history. The Métis were not known, did not have any place in Canada. And so they just lived without being acknowledged. When Canada became in 1983, when Canada made its own constitution, there's a section there that acknowledged the Métis, First Nation, and Inuit. It's section, I believe it's section 23 of the Canadian Constitution. And with that acknowledgement, Métis started to try and find their way and take their place. In 1993, the Metis Nation of Ontario was born, and Métis from across Ontario began to gather, acknowledge their heritage, and create their own, bring back their culture, their music, their traditions. And the Métis today have fought hard for their rights. In 1993, just a minute, Nancy. In 1993, the Metis Nation of Ontario was born.
Oh, okay.
That's when the first Métis started to organize and gather. In that same year, as the Métis wanted to get back to what would have been or more like their traditional communities, they wanted to have the harvesting rights. And harvesting rights are fishing and hunting. And because nobody owns the land, and because we don't own the land, but because we were the first people here, we have always, as Métis, fished and hunted. And those rights were taken away by the government of Canada. And so in 1993, we had a Métis hunter by the name of Steve Powley, Powley. And Steve decided, he was up in Sault Ste. Marie, and he decided, you know what? I'm Métis, I have the right to hunt. So he deliberately went out and shot a moose and hung it in his garage and opened the door so everyone could see. Up until then, he had been doing what he believed was his right to hunt, but he did it in a hidden way. So now he opened his garage and let everyone see that he had a moose and that he was exercising his right. But also in 1993, the Ministry of, I believe it was called Forestry and what, I can't remember at the time, they came and they took his truck and they took his gun and they took his meat and they took everything that related to it and they took him to court. And so Mr. Powley, with the help of the Metis Nation of Ontario, launched a lawsuit, or first of all, they went through that process. And in that process, the lower court determined that he was guilty. And so with the help of the Metis Nation, he took it to the higher court, and it went to the Supreme Court of Ontario and to the Supreme Court of Canada, and won at both of those levels. And so the Powley case is the benchmark for Métis rights in Canada. We have the right to fish. We have the right to harvest. And when I say harvest, we're talking about the plants as well. We are free to harvest, and we do that with extreme care. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. The next major hurdle for Métis was that despite the Powley case, Canada still did not recognize the Métis people and their rights. And so the then Prime Minister was Harper, and Prime Minister Harper commissioned commissioned an Indigenous lawyer to specialize in Métis rights. And his mandate was to go across Canada and determine what, if any, Métis rights there were. The man's name was Thomas Isaacs, and to this day, I love Tom. I just love him. I've met him personally. He's a wonderful man. But what he did, he took a year and he decided, he wrote a report based on his research. And the report was called A Matter of Constitutional Urgency. And he basically said, not only do Métis have rights, but they must be acknowledged by the government of Canada. And he laid out 17 points in his report of things that had to, ought to, should be done in order that the Métis were free to exercise their rights as a people, as a community, and as a nation. So that's the history of the Métis. I can pause here briefly for a minute if anyone wants to ask a question. Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
So even though Louis Riel's signature was on the Constitution back whenever it wasn't, it was like it was there, but it was completely ignored. Is that, oh,
Absolutely. At the time, Louis Riel was part of the people founding Canada. And he had been, when the Constitution was made, he had been discredited. And he was secretly taken to wherever the signing took place. I can't remember offhand.
yeah.
And he snuck in and signed the Constitution. Was a part of it. He brought Manitoba into the country. And so that's something we don't often hear, but it is the truth.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Like I said, the Métis after Louis Riel for a number of years, 100 years, the Métis hid. That leads me to the story of my life. The Indian Act does not impact Métis at all, just to answer your question. Thank you. My mother was Métis, and my heritage comes from my mother. My father was Scottish, and they married in 1942, I believe. And unfortunately, the marriage was not successful, and my mother had great difficulty in adjusting and just life. And so she disappeared, and I was not brought up with my mother. My father was very, very angry about the marriage and the relationship. And although there were 5 children, he wanted nothing to do with her. And any attempt that she made after the divorce to contact her children and or him was met with absolute disgust and disdain. I did not know my mother. I was taken from her when I was 2.5 years old. I don't remember anything about her. My father was a good man, and he brought us up well. He remarried a woman who had never had children. She was 40 years old. My dad was 40 when I was born. And then when he remarried my stepmother, he was, let me think, he would have been 49, and I was 9. I didn't know her, and my stepmother treated us well, but she did not know how to be a mother. I'm a mother. I'm sure many of you who are mothers understand that special bond. She didn't understand the physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological needs of children. We were well fed, she made clothes, the house was clean. But as a mother, I realized there's so much more to raising children than that. I married when I was 19. I have a wonderful husband. We've been married 54 years this year.
Wow.
We have 1 daughter, and she also is married, and I have 2 incredibly beautiful grandsons. The oldest is 13 and the youngest is 11. My youngest grandson is autistic and nonverbal, and he is a gift from God. As we've learned to deal with autism and understand neurodiversity, we have grown to be better people, to be kinder people, to be more understanding people. And so we thank God every day for that beautiful, beautiful little boy. that's my family. And my husband and I, my dad never, every time I asked him, even after I was married, about my mother, he would always say horrible things. He would call her names. He would talk about just dreadful things. And so I never knew one positive thing about my mother. I knew that she was part Indian. And when I asked my dad what Indian she was, one time he'd say Blackfoot, and the next time he'd say Iroquois, and the next time he'd say, I don't know. And so I never got any kind of feeling about that part of my family. Let me say this right now. I loved my father. He was wonderful, but that was wrong. To take a whole half of your family away from a child is wrong. Both of my brothers have been divorced, but they both spend time, energy, love, compassion with their children. And that's the way it ought to be. Children are so important. That's just an aside. Thank you for hearing me. But I always regretted that. And after my father, I did not want to hurt my father. He was very good to me. He was good to us as a family. And so I did nothing to hurt him. But after he died, my husband and I tried to seek out my mother. And we knew that she was born in Moon River. And I hope I'm not taking too much time. I know I've got to get to more stuff, but this is a funny story. My husband and I found out that Moon River on the map was at the end of the road. So we drove, it's up near Mactier and in the Muskoka area. So we drove up to Mactier and followed a road that said, you go this way to Moon River. And we got there and the road ended at the water. There was rocks and water and cottages, and that was it. So there was a little corner store there, and I went into the store and I said, I would like to know where Moon River is. And the gentleman said, that's Moon River right there. And he pointed to the river. I said, okay, if my mother was born in Moon River, where would she have been born? And they said, on an island in a house. And I didn't even know that. So I was very lucky. At the time, the Moon River Métis Council was just being formed, and somebody gave me the name of a woman who was the president of the Moon River Métis Council. So I gave her a call and I said, I'm trying to find my heritage. I don't know if I'm Métis or not, but I think I am. And so the woman, her name was Louise Goulding. And Louise said, well, I don't do genealogy, but she said, I'll see what I can do for you. What was your mother's last name? And I said, the name was Cascanet. And she said, I've heard that name. Leave it with me and I'll get back to you. So she called me a week later. And when I answered the phone, she said, hello, cousin. She was my cousin.
Oh,
I cried. My husband cried. And that was the start of my journey in finding my Métis heritage. Later, once Louise and I got to know one another and became friends, she lived on an island in Moon River, and she took me to the place that she knew my mother's family lived and grew, right on the Georgian Bay. That was, what's interesting about that is that since I was a child, I loved the outdoors, but not the streets and the buildings. I loved going to the parks. I wandered all day in the parks. My brothers, any number of us, there were 5 of us altogether. we'd leave in the morning after breakfast and just disappear for the day. And we had beautiful parkland all around us. And we would spend the day in the park, not sometimes fishing, sometimes wandering in the creek, whatever, but we loved outdoors. And my father would take us to a conservation area in the summer for holidays. We didn't have a lot of money, but he took us to the conservation area. And again, he and my stepmother would sit in the chair or lie on a blanket, and we would roam the forest. And I didn't realize why. When my daughter was born, I took her, my husband and I took her up to Killbear Provincial Park, which is up in, yes, you know that area. And we camped there every single year. She was in diapers the first year we took her, and we camped there every single year, her whole life. And now she's married and she camps with her children at Killbear. And I tell you that because the first time I went to Killbear and stood on those rocks and saw the trees bending in the wind and felt the water on my feet, on my legs, I felt peace, I felt calm, I felt at home. And even before I knew my Métis heritage, I would say, let's go home to the lake, because it just was home. When we went to meet or to find my mother, ended up at the end of a road on a rock on the bay of on the Georgian Bay. I stood on those rocks and I just stood there. It was like my soul connecting with Mother Nature. It was so beautiful. And so I know now on my journey that I was Métis. Even back then, I didn't know it, but I was Métis. I love nature. I love the land. I love the water. I love all that was. I did meet my mother when I was about 52. And no, I was a little younger than that. And she was actually on her deathbed. I don't know how they found me, but somebody who knew her, she was in the hospital. She'd gone into a diabetic coma and ended up in the hospital unconscious for a period of time. And somehow they found out that I was her daughter. And so I went to the hospital and I did meet her. And she was comatose, did not talk. She had a few moments of lucidity. And during that time, she would say, I always loved you. I always missed you. And then when I found this out, when I found her, I called my brothers and sisters. One brother and one sister wanted nothing to do with her. And I don't condemn them for that. We did not know her. She was not a part of our life. My other brother and a sister came to see her. And before she passed away. And that's my only recollection of my mother. I know that I wanted to see her, because when my daughter grew up, she had these big black eyes. And I don't have black eyes, and my husband doesn't have black eyes, and my father's eyes were blue. But when I saw my mother, I said, Marilyn, my daughter, has her grandma's eyes. So I embraced my Métis heritage. I became a part of the Metis Nation of Ontario. I'm a citizen in the Metis Nation of Ontario. I'm on the Metis Nation of Ontario Women's Council as the elder. And I also am on the restorative justice. We deal with First Nation, Métis, Inuit people who have been in trouble with the law, but who need restoration to their roots, not incarceration. We don't deal with serious criminal cases, but when the court allows, we deal with criminal so that we are able to deter or defer these people, many of them young people, and take them back to their roots. We draw up a plan that is consistent with their culture, that they take part in, and that restores them to their Métis roots, hopefully. I just want to talk about this smudge and explain it a bit. Smudging is a cultural ceremony, and we burn various medicinal plants, usually sage, sweetgrass, and or cedar. And we do that to cleanse ourselves and to connect us with our spirit and the Creator. Smudging allows me to stop, slow down, and become mindful and centered. It allows me to connect and be grounded. It clears negative thoughts and negative actions. I smudge myself, I smudge my grandchildren, I smudge my home. Wherever there is any potential for harm, I smudge. In terms of Mother Earth, the Métis are extremely conscious of our need to protect, preserve, and help. I will tell you, if all of the vegetation, trees, plants were removed from Mother Earth, she would die. If all of the animals, insects, fish, birds were removed from Mother Earth, she would die. If humanity was removed from Mother Earth, she would thrive. We are harming Mother Earth.
Mhm.
When our men hunt and shoot an animal, they kneel beside the animal and they thank the Creator for allowing this animal to nurture them and their families. We thank the Creator for giving us that animal.
Yeah.
When we go to the woods and harvest mushrooms, ferns, any of the herbs that are important and that are healthy, and we do harvest them, we again stand beside the plant and thank the Creator for giving us these plants, for giving us the ability to understand their use, and for continuing to let it grow. One thing that we don't do, never, never take more than we need. You only take what you can use. And when our harvesters, our hunters go and hunt, they take all, first of all, we use as much of the animal as can be used. Nothing is left for waste. Secondly, we only take what we need, but if there is lots, we provide for our community. The meat is cut, the meat is frozen if need be, but always given to those who are less fortunate in our community, to the elderly, to those who can't hunt, to ensure that all are well. With harvesting, we make sure that we don't we try not to, we go out in groups sometimes so that we can all learn. We're all learning, and I'm among all really learning. But we need to learn what fruits, what plants we can take and which ones will not harm us. But we also are careful not to over harvest. Only what we need. We don't want to make, we want to leave lots for others. Everyone deserves the opportunity to have those. And so as harvesters, sharing is extremely important. As well, one of the things that we have is circles. And if you ever go to a Métis meeting, the rows are not in little rows, we are in circles. Unless, depending on the kind of meeting, we need tables and we need that. But the circle is very important to us, because in a circle, nobody is above anybody else. Nobody stands up and looks down. We all say at the same level. We are all equal. Everyone is part of the circle, including our children. Something that I have been to I've been a Métis for a number of years, but I do not, still don't know everything, and I'm still learning. But every meeting that I've been to, the children are always right in the meeting. We don't send them off to another room with somebody else. They're in the meeting. They're part of our gathering. And we provide things to help them. We provide little papers for them to play with, toys for them to play with, but we ensure that they stay in the circle. I have never, at any Métis meeting, indoors or outdoors, heard Métis children fight. They do not ever. And I think it's because, and I believe it's because, we are taught to respect one another. We are taught to understand or try and understand. And our children are taught that they are as important as we are. My daughter, and again, I didn't know I was Métis at the time, but my daughter said as she grew up, she said, "Mom, I always knew that I was equal to you and Dad." And that's the way we should be bringing up our children. Children are so important. They are our future. I think the relationship between a grandmother and a grandchild is one of the most valuable on earth, because as a grandmother, I learned so much from my grandchildren. And as a grandson, my grandchildren respect me, learn from me. We understand one another. The love that we have is like no other. And that's the way those relationships should be. I don't want to, it's 10, we've got 9 minutes left, and I don't want to do it anything more until I've given you a chance to speak, because I know that some of you have questions. I can't believe, Nancy, I think it's wonderful that you have a cottage on the Moon River. That is wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm sure you've had exposure then to some of the Métis.
Could be.
Pardon me?
It could be. I'm not sure.
Oh, well, I'm sure you did, because there's all kinds of them there.
Okay.
And also, I do not lead Indigenous walks We have, I know of men who do, but I don't do that personally. I'm still learning and I don't know enough about the plants. And I wouldn't want anyone to pick something and get sick and blame me and sue me, because that's what we do in Canada.
Okay.
Any other questions or
Yeah,
thoughts?
Pearl, it's Karen, and I'm with Oakvillegreen, and I'm just so thrilled and actually pretty emotional that you share your personal story today. I think it's sort of shameful that, so many of us have so little history about Indigenous communities and the Métis. So it's just wonderful to hear from you today. I wasn't going to share my personal story, but interestingly, my mom grew up on Shawnaga First Nation.
Oh,
And one of the
Okay.
first places that we went as children, when we went to, now she was a white settler, but one of the first places that we went to with children in the 1960s was Killbear Park, which wasn't even a provincial park in 1960. So
Oh,
I share your passion and for that place, because I felt it too. The rocks and even the rattlesnakes. But that Georgian Bay is beautiful. So thank you for sharing your story with us today.
oh, you are welcome. Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. And we all have things that come up, and so many of them remind me of my heritage, of what I missed. And that is sad, but I've made it a happy thing. My daughter is a high school teacher in Newcastle, Ontario, and she teaches Indigenous education. And she teaches Indigenous authors. She's an English major, head of the English department. And she also teaches Indigenous studies and teaches the children how to smudge. And her and I go to the school and make bannock with the children and let them eat it there and show them how. So I have ensured that my family will carry on the Métis tradition and have a better understanding of their Métis heritage than I had.
I see Deborah there. Did you want to say something, Deborah?
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you, Pearl, for sharing your story. What an amazing opportunity to hear you talk about, your learnings and your wisdom and the path that your life has taken. I'm in Dundas, Ontario, and we're part of a local growing community, not unlike Oakvillegreen, but much smaller. And one of the things that several of us have been doing for the last couple of months is going to the Hamilton Regional Indian Center on Ottawa Street North. They have a drumming circle that is open to everyone every Thursday night. And
Nice.
you can go and break bread with them and participate in the drumming. And it's an experience that stays with me for days after. The resonating of the drum, the singing. They hand out sheet music so we can all try to sing and learn the songs. And I just wanted to share that with everyone because they're so welcoming. I am a settler. I come from a long line of settlers, and healing is a big part of my journey, I think, probably for all of us in varying levels of consciousness, right? So I just wanted to reach out and say thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Deborah. I forgot to mention that I also am a drummer. I'm part of the All Our Relations Métis Drumming Circle, and we perform when we're invited through schools, churches, organizations. Canada Day in Oshawa, we're always there. And I have a drum that was made by a man that I know, It's absolutely beautiful, and on the face of it is painted a wolf, and I always have related to the wolves. Even as a child, I loved wolf stories. So thank you for sharing that. I'd forgotten about my band, my drummer, and my drumming. Thank you.
Maybe I'll see you there sometime. Hamilton Regional Indian Center.
I will try and get there. Yes, yes. Thank you.
I also wanted to thank you so much for sharing all this beautiful story of respect, connection, love, joy, sadness. It was quite emotional for me as well. And I would like just to take away the consciousness of preserving and protecting Mother Earth, because this is something we cherish, and we would love to spread awareness in the community. And we're very thankful for you to join, so we have that opportunity to learn and also to share this with everybody who joined us today. Thank you again so much, Pearl. Thank you everyone for joining.
And thank you, Anelia, for allowing me to come. It was an honor for me to be able to come to you and share part of my history and to learn from you as well. I don't know if it's ever useful again, but if you find something that you think I might help you with, I'd be more than happy to, okay? Thank you all. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, Pearl. I hope we'll see you again.
Thank you.
For
Thank
sure,
you.
we're going to connect. Yeah.
Have a great
Okay.
day, everyone. Thank you
Thank
again.
you so much.
Bye.